Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought the abandoned estate on the edge of suburbia, I thought I was escaping chaos, not inviting it. I never expected a pie-wielding HOA queen named Karen to launch a full-blown war over my private pool, but in Texas, peace is just the calm before the neighborhood insurgency. I never thought I'd have to tell a 60-something woman in a designer windbreaker that my pool wasn't a community center. But Texas has a funny way of throwing curveballs at your peace and quiet, especially when your backyard borders a suburban kingdom run by a woman named Karen. I moved into the old Barlow estate about 6 weeks ago. The place had sat abandoned for nearly a decade, tucked behind a rusted wrought iron gate and overgrown mesquites. 4 acres of land, a faded Victorian-style mansion, and, most importantly for me, a 20-yard lap pool surrounded by what used to be ivy-covered brick and a few crumbling statues. I'd spent the last 3 years dreaming about this project. After retiring from coaching college swim teams, I needed space. Space to breathe, to build, and maybe even to forget a couple things I'd rather not get into. So when the property went up for auction, I snatched it. Cash, no mortgage, no debt, and, thank the Lord, no HOA. I spent 2 months getting the basics livable. Contractors handled the roof and foundation. I focused on the pool and perimeter security, new cameras, motion lights, a fresh electronic gate, and a cedar fence along the eastern boundary where my property brushed up against the edge of the Clearbrook Ridge HOA. I'd heard of them in passing, a collection of McMansions with matching mailboxes and people who apparently voted on lawn heights. I wanted no part of it. My first real introduction to the locals came on a Tuesday afternoon, just after I'd hooked up the filtration system and let the pool start circulating again. I was tinkering with the automatic chlorine feeder when I heard a distinct knock on my gate. 2 knocks, then a pause, then another 2. Like a code. I wiped my hands and checked the monitor. 3 women stood outside. The one in the center held a pie dish covered in foil, and the other 2 flanked her like Secret Service agents who got lost in a wine bar. I stepped outside and greeted them with a nod. The leader of the trio smiled wide, Southern charm practically dripping off her lips. "Hi there. You must be the new neighbor. I'm Karen Desmond, and these are my friends, Beverly and June. We're part of the Clearbrook Ridge Safety Council." She actually said that with a straight face. "We just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." Before I could speak, she extended the pie. Homemade pecan, my mother's recipe, and, well, it's kind of a tradition around here. I took the dish. It was still warm. I'll give her that. Karen's eyes flicked over my shoulder toward the house. This place has such history. We're all just so happy it's being revived. You know, the previous owners were lovely. They always invited us to use the pool during the summer. Just a few of us ladies. It was our little oasis. There was that tone, the one that sounds polite but is really a challenge. I smiled. I appreciate the welcome. Really. But I do want to be upfront. This is private property now. The pool's for family use. Only a flicker crossed her face, like someone told her her favorite brunch spot had closed. "Oh, well, of course. We understand. It's been a bit of a neighborhood tradition. We believe in fostering community spirit." "I completely respect that," I said, "but this land isn't part of the HOA, and I'd prefer to keep the pool private." She stared at me, her smile doing a little tremor, and then nodded once. Sharp. "Of course. You're new. It takes time to understand the culture here." Her friends stayed quiet, but they both did that synchronized head tilt, like I'd insulted the flag. Karen leaned in slightly. "You know, people around here take pride in our traditions. It's how we keep Clearbrook Ridge so harmonious." I didn't respond, just offered another polite smile and thanked them again for the pie. They left after a few more pleasantries, but not before Karen gave one final comment over her shoulder. "Well, we'll see how long this private attitude lasts. People around here don't like change." That night, I watched the footage back on my security monitor. They hadn't parked near my house. They'd come through the east pedestrian access path that leads into the HOA's greenbelt. My fence ends just before that, and there's a small maintenance road running between the 2 properties. I made a mental note to add more motion coverage and maybe some signage. I didn't touch the pie. I woke up the next morning to an alert from the security system, motion detected at the east fence line at 6:42 a.m. I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a deer nosing around again, so I didn't rush to check it. I brewed coffee, fried some eggs, and finally sat down with my phone to pull up the footage. That's when I froze mid-sip. There they were. Karen, Beverly, and June, dressed in matching floral swim caps, sundresses, and oversized sunglasses, calmly climbing over the lowest section of my cedar fence like they were stepping into a damn country club. Karen even paused at the top to hand down a bottle of rosé to Beverly like it was some kind of sacred offering. Then they strutted across the lawn, laid out thick towels, unfolded portable loungers, and made themselves at home. By 7 a.m., they were fully reclined, sipping wine from plastic tumblers and sunning themselves like entitled flamingos. I watched it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. Nope. Trespassing in broad daylight, with beverages and coordinated pool gear. You almost had to admire the audacity. I pulled up the live feed. They were still there. By 7:18, I was dressed and in the truck. I called the Travis County Sheriff's Department on the way and explained the situation. They dispatched a unit and advised me not to approach the trespassers until law enforcement arrived. Fine by me. I wasn't in the mood to argue with pool pirates before finishing my coffee. When I pulled into the driveway, I stayed in the truck and watched from a distance. Karen noticed me first. She lifted her drink in a lazy toast and smiled like she'd been invited. Beverly waved. June pretended not to see me. 10 minutes later, a patrol SUV rolled in. Officer Jenkins, mid-30s, clean uniform, the kind of guy who looked like he still believed in procedure. I greeted him at the gate, showed him the live feed, and then walked him to the backyard. Karen was still lounging. She didn't move until she saw the badge. "Oh," she said, adjusting her sunglasses, "this is all a misunderstanding." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, you're on private property. You crossed a fence. That's unlawful entry." Karen sat up straighter. "We've always used this pool. It's a community practice. There was never any fence before." "There is now," I said. Beverly added, "It was unlocked." "It wasn't," I corrected. "They climbed it. I've got it all on camera. Would you like to see the footage, officer?" "I already did," he said, pulling out his notepad. Karen stood up, shaking the water off like a wet cat. "This is harassment. We're long-standing members of Clearbrook Ridge. He's new here. He doesn't understand the way things work." Jenkins didn't blink. "This property is not part of Clearbrook Ridge, ma'am. The boundary line is clearly marked on the plat. And unless you have written permission to be here, which you don't, you're trespassing." He took their IDs, wrote up formal warnings, and told them to vacate immediately or face arrest. As they packed up, Karen turned to me and said, in the most chillingly casual voice I've heard from someone not holding a knife, "You're making a mistake. People in this neighborhood don't respond well to walls. You're setting yourself up to be very alone." They left their towels behind. After they were gone, Jenkins lingered a moment. "You might want to reinforce that fence and maybe add a camera to cover the north corner, just in case I nodded. I'll get it done this week." That night, I installed a new motion sensor on the north side and called a contractor to extend the fence by 3 feet. I also ordered a few private property "Trespassers will be prosecuted" signs and posted one by the path Karen had used, just in case she mistook my silence for surrender. Later, around midnight, I got a phone call. Number blocked. A woman's voice, calm, almost gentle, said, "You shouldn't have involved the police. That was your second mistake." Then she hung up. 2 days passed without incident. I took the silence as a temporary ceasefire. I even allowed myself to believe, just for a minute, that Karen had gotten the message. Maybe the police report shook her up. Maybe she decided to take her passive aggression back behind the HOA hedges where it belonged. Hell, maybe Beverly and June staged an intervention and locked her out of their Facebook group. I even sat by the pool that evening with a book, just enjoying the sound of the water filter humming like a calm, obedient machine. Then came Thursday. Around 10 in the morning, I heard the gate buzzer go off. When I checked the monitor, I nearly choked on my coffee. There she was, Karen Desmond, standing prim and composed in front of the gate like a courthouse statue, folder in one hand, phone in the other, her signature Bluetooth earpiece snug in place like she was preparing to mediate a hostage crisis. I answered the gate speaker calmly. "What do you want, Karen?" She smiled into the camera like she was on a morning talk show. "I have official HOA business to discuss with you." I didn't answer. I just hit the unlock buzzer and let her walk the long gravel path to the porch, where I waited with my arms crossed. She didn't come alone. Beverly followed a few steps behind, holding a tote bag like it was evidence in a criminal trial. Karen extended the folder toward me. This is a formal notice from the Clearbrook Ridge Homeowners Association. According to Section 18 of the Neighborhood Bylaws, you are currently in violation of historic shared use expectations regarding the recreational infrastructure on your property. I blinked. I'm not in the HOA. Karen didn't flinch. That's precisely what we're challenging. There are community easements and neighborly customs that long predate your ownership. These are protected under the informal usage principles that our HOA maintains. I stared at the paperwork. It wasn't a real legal document. The logo at the top was an old JPEG of the Clearbrook Ridge sign, and the formatting looked like it had been typed up in a Word doc by someone who thought italics made things legally binding. This is nonsense, I said. There's no easement. The deed is clean, and you don't get to create access rights out of thin air. Karen's smile thinned. You're resisting a peaceful resolution. We'd hoped to resolve this without escalation. Beverly pulled out her phone and began filming. We're documenting this. For the record, for what record? I asked. Karen leaned in just slightly. We'll be escalating this to the HOA committee. You'll be getting community notices. Enforcement is not always about paper, Jared. Sometimes it's about presence. Then she took a step back and added, we're also beginning our weekly walks again. As part of our safety patrol, we have a right to observe the perimeter of this property for hazards or violations that could affect the neighborhood. You mean you're going to start stalking my fence line again? It's called vigilance. I'll be calling it harassment. Karen gave a brief nod like she'd made her point. You'll regret making this combative. You're upsetting the balance here. She turned and left with Beverly, the sound of her heels crunching over gravel like little percussion instruments of threat. That night, I reviewed my deed again, then drove to the Travis County Recorder's office first thing Friday morning. The clerk helped me pull up the property history. There was, as I already knew, no record of easements, no shared use clauses, no HOA overlay. My land was mine, period. On the way back home, I stopped by a printer and made 6 laminated signs. Private property not affiliated with any HO. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I posted one every 20 yards along the fence. That should have been enough. But when I got home, there was a shoebox sitting inside my mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside, a dead fish wrapped in a page from the HOA newsletter. A note printed in a neat serif font was taped to the fish's belly. Swim alone if you want. But don't be surprised when the water gets dark. I handed it to Officer Jenkins later that day. He took it without comment and filled out a harassment report. Keep your cameras running, he said. People like her don't like losing. He was right. I didn't know it yet, but she was just getting started. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of quiet that doesn't last in Texas suburbs when your neighbor thinks she's God with a clipboard. I had just returned from HEB with a car full of groceries, eggs, coffee, jalapeno cheddar sausages, and 2 bags of soil for the flower beds I'd started last week. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something unusual. Karen was already there. She stood by the closed front gate, folder in one hand, phone in the other, and her usual Bluetooth earpiece in place. But what sent my stomach into a slow curl was her posture. Still. Too still. She wasn't pacing or performing for the cameras. She was waiting, focused. She turned her head slightly as I stepped out of the truck and raised a hand in a gesture that was somewhere between a greeting and a warning. "Morning, Jared," she called out, calm and cold. "We need to have a serious conversation." I didn't answer right away. I set the grocery bags on the porch and walked toward the gate, stopping a few feet short. My phone was already in hand, thumb hovering over the panic button in my security app. Karen held up the folder again. "Final offer. This is your last chance to cooperate before we proceed with enforcement action. You're not law enforcement," I said. "True," she nodded, "but we have our ways." I sighed. "Karen, I've already explained this. The land is mine. The pool is private. There is no shared usage. This HOA fantasy of yours doesn't hold up in court, and it doesn't scare me." She stared at me, not blinking. "We tried the polite route. The traditional route, but you've made yourself into a disruption, and when someone disrupts the neighborhood ecosystem, the neighborhood corrects it. That's when it happened." With a suddenness that made my mouth go dry, Karen reached into her oversized leather tote and pulled out a compact black pistol. She didn't aim it with trembling fear. She didn't scream or flail. She leveled it at me with the ease of someone lighting a barbecue grill. "Open the gate," she said, her voice perfectly flat. I didn't move. "You're pointing a gun at me." "You'll unlock the gate," she repeated. "You'll stop interfering with our rights. Or this turns into something messier." Behind the weapon, her phone was recording. I could see the red light. She wanted this on camera, but not the truth. Her narrative, her angle. Whatever twisted story she planned to spin later about how the hostile loner had threatened the peace of the community, I kept my hands in clear view. "Karen, listen to me. You're making a huge mistake. No, Jared, you made it. The second you brought in cops instead of being neighborly." I tapped the panic button on my phone. The system beeped once. That meant everything was now being streamed live to the cloud and to Officer Jenkins's dispatch. Karen's lips curled slightly when she saw the movement. "You think that matters?" But her voice wavered, just a hint, as the distant wail of sirens crept in, cutting through the stillness. Within 60 seconds, Jenkins's cruiser rounded the corner and tore down the gravel path. Karen took a step back, gun still in hand, but she didn't run. She didn't even flinch as Jenkins pulled up, jumped out of the car, and drew on her. "Drop the weapon, now!" She hesitated, half a second too long, before finally lowering the gun and setting it on the pavement. Jenkins cuffed her without ceremony, Miranda rights echoing off the stone pillars by the gate. I watched in silence as he searched her bag and found a second magazine and a printed letter addressed to me, which read, "This is your last warning. Return control of the pool to the community or suffer the consequences." I didn't say a word until Jenkins was done logging evidence. He looked at me with a long, flat stare. "You all right?" I nodded. "That's the second time she's come onto my property with threats. This time she brought a weapon." Jenkins glanced at the camera on his uniform, then back at mine above the gate. "We've got it all." Later that afternoon, I received a call from the sheriff's office. The pistol Karen used had been registered to her deceased husband and was not legally transferred into her name. She had no concealed carry permit, no legal justification to have it in her bag, let alone draw it on someone. That night, I rewatched the footage. The expression on her face when she pointed that gun, it wasn't rage, it wasn't fear, it was entitlement. The same look she'd given me that first day at the gate, with a pie in her hand and a threat behind her smile. Only now the gloves were off. Karen was booked and held without bail that Sunday evening. The charge sheet read like the opening act of a bad courtroom drama: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, criminal trespass, harassment, unlawful possession of a firearm, and attempted extortion. Jenkins said she'd barely blinked when they fingerprinted her, just kept muttering about how the balance was being destroyed. That night, I slept with a baseball bat next to the bed and all motion sensors dialed up to maximum sensitivity. By Tuesday morning, the Travis County judge had signed a search warrant for her property. Given the firearm and the printed threat found in her bag, the DA had reason to believe there could be more evidence of coordinated harassment, or worse. I was invited to observe from a distance, mostly because Jenkins said I deserved to see what she'd really been up to. They hit her house at 9 a.m., sharp. From the outside, it looked like any other oversized, overpriced suburban two-story. Manicured bushes, perfectly painted shutters, 2 garden flags about "Home Sweet Home" fluttering on the porch. But the moment the deputies stepped inside, that illusion peeled away like cheap wallpaper. The living room had been converted into what can only be described as a tactical HOA command center. A massive corkboard covered one wall, color-coded pins, maps of the neighborhood, printouts of satellite images from Google Earth. Some of them had hand-drawn notations marking zones of concern. My property was circled in red ink with a big exclamation point next to the pool. There were labeled folders for at least a dozen neighbors. Noise risk, yard non-compliance, fence violations. It read like dossiers compiled by a wannabe suburban Stasi. They found a filing cabinet full of letters, dozens of them printed on imitation HOA letterhead, filled with threats and invented penalties. Some were addressed to people who'd already moved out of the neighborhood. One drawer contained returned envelopes stamped undeliverable. She hadn't just bullied current residents, she'd kept tabs on ghosts. And then came the digital gold mine, a small safe under the stairs, unlocked with a key recovered from her purse. Inside was a USB drive labeled security footage, private ops. The videos were damning. Dozens of clips showed Karen and her safety council on nighttime patrols. Flashlights, clipboards, hushed whispers. They peered into yards, took pictures of parked cars. One video showed her opening a neighbor's unlocked gate and snapping a photo of their hot tub. Another showed her scolding a teenage boy for unauthorized basketball dribbling after 9 p.m. But the worst of it, a recording dated just 2 weeks before my move-in. Karen stood in front of her two accomplices with a printed photo of me, taken from the county assessor's website. She said, "He's from outside. No roots, no loyalty. This is the kind of person who unravels a neighborhood. We'll contain him." The sheriff's deputies didn't even look surprised. One of them said under his breath, "She's been running a shadow HOA." Turns out, a few residents had quietly complained over the years, threatening notes, cryptic late-night calls, community feedback sessions that felt more like interrogations. But nothing had stuck. Until now. I gave my full statement to the investigators and handed over all footage from my property, the gun, the threats, the mailbox fish. They said the case was solid. State-level charges were inevitable now, not just county-level misdemeanors. That afternoon, I stopped by Jenkins's office to drop off a hard copy of the footage timestamps. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were scanned copies of 2 documents found during the search. One was a letter Karen had never sent, addressed to me. It read, "You don't belong here. This place has rules, and if you won't respect them, we'll rewrite you out of the story." The other was a list, a simple typed page titled "Non-Compliant Pending Action." My name was at the top. Beneath it, "Target Pool Access." "Undermine Authority." "Uncooperative Right." Under that, Phase 3, Direct Intervention. That wasn't community management. That was a plan. It didn't take long for the media to sniff out the story. By Friday morning, I saw a news van parked across the street from the Clearbrook Ridge sign, the reporter standing beside a blurred-out photo of Karen mid-handcuff. The chyron read, "Suburban HOA Queenpin arrested after armed showdown with neighbor." My phone lit up with calls I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in interviews. I was preparing for court. The Travis County District Attorney announced formal charges that same afternoon. 5 felony counts: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, attempted extortion, unlawful possession of a firearm, criminal trespass with malicious intent, and felony harassment. The evidence from the raid had sealed the deal. State prosecutors were stepping in. They scheduled the arraignment for the following Monday. I showed up early, wore a suit I hadn't touched since the college coaching days, and walked into the courthouse knowing half the damn neighborhood was probably watching from home. Jenkins met me at the security checkpoint and gave me a brief nod. We weren't friends, but he'd seen enough to stand on the right side of this. Karen was brought into the courtroom in cuffs and a tan jail-issued uniform. She looked different, drawn, pale, her signature blowout now flat and lifeless. But the crazy hadn't left her eyes. Not by a long shot. The judge, a stern man with a voice like sandpaper on gravel, called the case. The prosecutor launched into a list of offenses so long I thought he'd run out of breath. When he got to the part about systematic manipulation of HOA influence to conduct illegal surveillance and intimidation, I saw Karen smirk. Her defense attorney tried to object, said the phrasing was theatrical. The judge overruled it without blinking. Then came the playback. First, the footage from my security cameras, Karen aiming the pistol, her monotone threat, my panic button triggering, Jenkins pulling in. Every angle, every word, every second captured in clean, high-res video. Then the recordings from her own stash, the security patrols, the neighborhood dossiers, the nights she described me as someone they'd rewrite out of the story. The courtroom was silent. Not the dramatic kind of silence you see in movies. The kind where people realize they're watching the unraveling of something deeply wrong. Her lawyer argued it was all a misunderstanding. Said Karen had suffered recent emotional strain from widowhood and was acting out in confusion. Claimed she misunderstood her standing as a respected figure in the HOA community. The prosecution fired back immediately. Emotional distress doesn't justify forming a paramilitary surveillance ring and pointing a gun at a neighbor. Then it was my turn on the stand. I spoke clearly, directly. I walked them through the events from the first pie to the gun. I explained the cameras, the forged letters, the fish in the mailbox, the night call. I showed them her folder, the Phase 3 note, her words, her plans. The prosecutor asked how I felt during the confrontation at the gate. I didn't sugarcoat it. Like I was 1 second away from becoming a headline. Karen snorted. The judge looked up sharply. "Ms. Desmond, do you find something amusing?" She stood. Actually stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this neighborhood used to be beautiful, orderly, safe. I tried to protect it. He came here and destroyed everything. He brought tension, locked gates, aggression. I tried to restore balance. I did what any leader would. The judge let her finish. Then, stone cold, he leaned forward. That wasn't leadership. That was a campaign of domestic terrorism under the disguise of community management. Motion filed, trial approved, no bail. No plea bargain. The judge set a court date and remanded Karen back to custody. Outside, the reporters swarmed. I walked right past them. The next day, a manila envelope was slid under my door. No name. Inside was a letter from Beverly. It was short. We didn't know she had a gun. We thought it was all theater. We were wrong. I'm sorry. That afternoon, I filed a civil lawsuit. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, trespassing, and attempted coercion with a deadly weapon. Damages sought, $470,000. My lawyer told me, with the footage and the police backing, you'll win this with one arm tied behind your back. I didn't smile. I just ordered a second layer of security fencing. The trial began 3 weeks later, and by then, the story had already metastasized beyond the borders of Clearbrook Ridge. Local headlines evolved into regional coverage, and by the time the trial opened, there were online articles with titles like The HOA Vigilante of Austin and Karen versus the State of Texas. A suburban siege. I kept my head down. No interviews, no cameras. I showed up each morning with my attorney and a thermos of black coffee, sat straight, and let the prosecution do what they were paid to do. The trial lasted 4 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The gun, the video threats, the files from her home, the Phase 3 list with my name sitting at the top like a target on a dartboard. Her lawyer tried a few wild angles: mental health, community stress, misinterpreted leadership intentions, but the jury didn't buy it. By day 3, half of them looked like they were just waiting for it to be over so they could go home and bolt their fences tighter. On the final day, Karen took the stand. It was a disaster. She tried to justify everything, claimed her actions were preventative, that she had anticipated civil unrest due to my uncooperative behavior, and that the HOA had entrusted her with maintaining moral and spatial harmony. She used phrases like territorial recalibration and soft enforcement zones. Even the stenographer had to pause once to clarify what she'd just said. When the prosecutor asked her if she ever considered that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have the authority to do any of this, she responded, "If the HOA won't protect this neighborhood, someone has to." That line sealed it. The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge didn't waste time. He called her actions a deliberate campaign of coercion, harassment, and intimidation carried out under the delusion of suburban sovereignty. Then came the sentence: 11 years in state prison, no possibility of parole before serving 8. Her face crumpled not in fear, but in disbelief, like she still expected someone to step in and explain to the judge how important she was. After court adjourned, Beverly and June didn't even look at her as she was escorted out in cuffs. The civil case came a week later. My attorney presented the same mountain of evidence, plus the psychological reports confirming stress-related insomnia, anxiety, and the fact that I had to spend thousands reinforcing my property against a woman who believed her HOA status made her immune to reality. The judge awarded me $470,000 in damages, half from her estate, half from a civil lien placed on her property. That night, I received a formal letter from the interim board of Clearbrook Ridge. It stated that the HOA had voted to initiate full reorganization, including bylaws review, financial audit, and the dissolution of Karen's so-called safety council. They also issued a formal apology and requested that I consider attending a community roundtable to repair neighborhood trust. I wrote back, politely declining. I had no interest in trust. Instead, I took the settlement check, paid off the last of the contractors, and filed paperwork with the county. My property was now officially marked in the registry as privately owned parcel, not subject to HOA governance. A new legal status with teeth. No administrative authority could impose restrictions, fees, or shared use policies. HOA free for life. The sheriff's office followed up with me 2 days later. They'd tracked down the origin of the fish letter and confirmed it had been created on Karen's home printer. Beverly had quietly testified that Karen kept a folder titled Psych Ops, Pool War. I didn't want to know what else was in there. On the last Friday of that month, I walked the perimeter of my property for the first time without checking over my shoulder. The air was warm, quiet. I replaced the old rusted gate sign with a new plaque, embossed and bolted directly into the steel. Private property, no HOA jurisdiction. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Then I poured myself a whiskey, sat by the pool, and listened to the filter hum like it always should have. The summer drifted in without resistance. No more gate buzzers at odd hours. No letters stuffed under my door. No women in floral caps sneaking across my fence line like entitled raccoons. For the first time since moving in, the house felt like what I'd intended it to be. Quiet, intact, and entirely mine. I doubled the security system anyway. Not because I expected Karen to come back. She wasn't eligible for parole until I turned 50, but because peace, once earned, is something worth defending with redundancy. I had a secondary gate installed beyond the first, built with reinforced aluminum and coded access tied to my phone, motion sensors every 20 feet, a private alarm line connected directly to the sheriff's office. I even installed spike strips along the perimeter path that used to lead into Clearbrook Ridge's greenbelt, now permanently blocked by a gravel berm and 2 no-access, private easement signs large enough to be read from orbit. One morning, I watched a realtor lead a young couple past the edge of the neighborhood. She pointed at my fence and whispered something, clearly trying to spin it as a quaint eccentricity. The man just laughed. The woman looked over at my property, noticed the camera mounted on a pole, and subtly nudged him away. Good. That meant it was working. The HOA sent one final notice through their new board, letting me know they'd unanimously voted to rename the Safety Council bench in their Central Park. It had once borne a plaque with Karen's name. They removed it, melted it down, and replaced it with a new one, in memory of accountability. Cute. I never replied. As for Beverly and June, they were served subpoenas for their roles, but ultimately cut deals. Community service, restraining orders, mandatory counseling. I saw June once at the grocery store, standing in the frozen food aisle, staring blankly at a box of toaster waffles like it contained the secrets of the universe. She didn't say a word. I didn't either. I hired a landscaping team to redo the backyard. New stone paths, native plants, subtle lighting. I turned the north end of the property, the section closest to the old HOA line, into a small meditation garden. Not because I meditate, but because the silence felt earned now. It deserved a space, and by the gate, just under the cameras and across from the keypad, I mounted one final plaque. Not one of those cheap plastic ones. Custom forged, brushed steel, clean lines, no ambiguity. Private, no HOA zone. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Every courier reads it twice. Every jogger gives it a wide berth. And every time I walk past it, I feel the same thing I felt the moment Karen was led out of that courtroom in cuffs. Not triumph, not revenge, just air. Clean, unobstructed air.